Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're talking about the death of easy elk hunting. And I don't mean elk hunting is dead, obviously. I don't mean elk are impossible to kill. I mean the old version of elk hunting is dying fast. The version where a hunter could show up, hike the obvious trail, bugle from the first ridge, glass the prettiest basin, and expect elk to act untouched is disappearing pretty fast. Too many hunters are willing to go far, have the same maps, the same apps, the same information, the same calls, and the same expectations. Elk have been pressured, educated, displaced, and conditioned by repeated human patterns. So this episode is not about complaining, it's about helping you adapt, because elk are still killable. Opportunity still exists. But the hunters who keep hunting yesterday's game are going to keep getting beat by today's elk. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent elk hunter. You know, for a long time, Western elk hunting was sold with a pretty simple message: buy a tag, head west, hike hard, bugle loud and often, and eventually you're going to find elk. And honestly, there was some truth to that in certain places, in certain areas. There were areas where pressure was lower, information was harder to get, access felt more open, and hunters had to learn country the hard way. You didn't have every drainage, trailhead, burn, water source, glassing knob, and migration corridor all sitting in your pocket on a phone. But that world has changed. Today, a brand new elk hunter can watch videos, download maps, study satellite imagery, follow podcasts, read forums, and walk into the same basins that took older hunters years to find. And that has helped a lot of people get started, cut their learning curve, and that's all great, but it has also created new problems. Everybody is learning from the same playbook. The obvious trailheads are crowded. The obvious meadows are checked. The obvious wallows get camera pressure. The obvious glassing points get used by multiple hunters. Easy access didn't just create opportunity, it created expectations. And when hunters expect old results from modern pressure, the mountain teaches a hard lesson fast. Elk don't need to understand hunting pressure the way that we talk about it. They don't need to know what a GPS app is. They don't need to know what a diaphragm call is. They don't need to know what opening weekend means on a calendar. They only need to survive repeated disturbance. When hunters keep entering the same drainages from the same access points, elk feel that. When hunters keep bugling from the same ridge lines, elk hear that. When hunters keep walking into bedding cover with bad wind, elk smell that. When trucks, side-by-sides, boot tracks, camp noise, and human scent all start showing up in predictable places, elk adjust. And that's what a lot of hunters miss. Elk are not sitting there thinking through some complicated strategy, right? They're reacting to pressure, experience, and survival. If a bull gets bumped from a meadow 3 mornings in a row, he doesn't need to understand why. He just stops being there in daylight. If a herd gets called to from every ridge in the drainage, they don't need to analyze it. They just become less willing to expose themselves in that type of area. And this is why old tactics start failing. The hunter keeps repeating the same pattern, but the elk are no longer living inside that pattern. They slide into darker timber. They use broken terrain. They move at night. They bed tighter. They shift just far enough away from obvious human traffic to survive. Elk adapted first. Hunters are the ones still trying to catch up. Now, one of the biggest mistakes a lot of modern elk hunters make is assuming the best looking country on the map is automatically the best place to hunt. But a big meadow tucked below dark timber looks good. A perfect saddle between 2 drainages looks good. A north-facing timber pocket above water looks good. A pretty basin with burns, benches, and glassing points looks good. And that is a problem. If it looks obvious to you, there's a good chance it looks obvious to everybody else too. That does not mean elk never use those places. They absolutely do. But in pressured country, the obvious spots usually die first. They get scouted first. They get glassed first. They get called into first. They get walked through first. And once elk start connecting those locations with human pressure, daylight use changes fast. That's why hunters get fooled by sign. They find tracks, rubs, wallows, beds, and poop and they assume that they're in the game. But sign alone doesn't tell you enough. You have to ask when that sign was made, what direction the elk were moving, what wind allowed them to use it safely, and whether pressure has already changed that pattern. The death of easy elk hunting starts when beautiful country becomes more predictable country. And predictable country is usually where hunters arrive before elk do. Hey, if you hunt public land elk and you're tired of grinding through random seasons, I built the elk hunting series of ebooks for you. Most hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack a system. And that's exactly why I built the elk hunting ebook series as a complete progressive framework for Western elk hunters who are done guessing and ready to hunt with intention. Volume 1 is going to be Foundations in Reality. I reset your mindset and expose the assumptions that quietly wreck seasons. In Volume 2, Finding Elk and Understanding Pressure, you'll learn how elk actually move under pressure so you can anticipate instead of react. In Volume 3, Terrain, Wind, and Position, I break down how to use landscape and thermals to consistently create opportunities. In Volume 4, Calling, Silence, and Pressure, sound becomes a decision tool, not an impulse. In Volume 5, Bow Hunting Execution, we're talking about close range strategy so you can finish your encounters. And in Volume 6, Late Season and Post-Rut, we're talking about how elk shift after the rut and how to adapt when others quit. This is a system built for consistency. This isn't theory. It's a structured system to help you find elk, read country, and make confident decisions every season. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 50% off at backboneunlimited.com. Modern elk hunters have more tools than any generation before them. We have better boots, better packs, better clothing, better optics, better rangefinders, better mapping systems, better calls, better tents, better food, better trail cameras, and more information that we could ever consume. And the list goes on. But better gear and information does not automatically create a better elk hunter. And that's where a lot of guys get exposed. They have every tool they need to succeed, but they still make poor decisions at the wrong time. They push into a bedding area because they're impatient. They call from a bad setup because they're excited. They ignore wind because they want the shortcut. They chase fresh sign without asking where the elk were going. They glass for 10 minutes and move because nothing appeared immediately, and we don't have that patience. We want that instant gratification now, right? Just like on social media. Scroll, 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 scroll. The mountain doesn't care how expensive your setup is or what you want out of it. Elk don't care what pack you wear, what bow you shoot, what glass is on your tripod, or what app is on your phone. They only respond to pressure, scent, sound, movement, terrain, and timing. And that's why easy elk hunting is dying. The margin for sloppy judgment is shrinking. The hunter who used to get away with a few mistakes may not get away with as many now. Too many other hunters are in the system, and elk have less tolerance for human patterns. In modern elk hunting, gear can help, information can help, technology can help, but your judgment still kills the elk. Now we need to touch on calling, because calling still works. Absolutely, right? Killed my bull at 4 yards last year after finally calling him in. And that needs to be said clearly right up front, because every year somebody swings too far the other way and says pressured elk are not going to respond to calls anymore. And I don't believe that that's true. Elk are still vocal animals. Bulls still react to cows. Cows still communicate with the herd. Herd bulls still defend space when the timing, emotion, and setup are right. But easy calling is dying. The old idea that you can just walk onto any ridge, fire off a bugle, wait for a bull to answer, and then just march straight at him is getting less reliable in pressured country. Too many bulls have heard bad calling from bad positions with bad wind and impatient hunters. Too many elk have been approached by hunters who made noise before they ever had a plan. You know, calling isn't magic, it's just a communication tool. And communication only works when it matches the situation. A location bugle has a purpose. A cow call has a purpose. Silence has a purpose. Moving quietly to gain better position has a purpose. The problem is not calling. The problem is calling because you don't know what else to do. Modern elk hunting requires more discipline than that. Before you call, you need to know what you're trying to make that bull do, where the wind is going, where he can travel, and where you need to be if he actually responds. If easy calling is dying, then the next level of elk hunting is position. And that's where a lot of hunters need to make the shift. Instead of asking, how do I make this bull come to me? Start asking, where does this bull already want to go? And how do I get there without him knowing? That question changes everything. Now you're not just making sound and hoping. You're reading terrain and you're watching thermals. You're studying bedding cover and feeding areas, escape routes, maybe pressure lines and natural travel corridors. You're thinking about where elk feel safe, where they can use their nose, where they can see danger, and where hunters are least likely to approach correctly. That's the modern elk game. The best setup is not always the loudest setup. It's usually the setup where the bull has a reason to move, the wind gives you a chance, and the terrain hides your approach until you're close enough for it to matter. And sometimes that can mean calling. Sometimes, though, that means staying quiet. Sometimes that means backing out and waiting for evening. Sometimes that means circling a long way around to get the right winds instead of trying to force a shortcut. Noise might get a bull's attention, but position is what gives you a chance to actually kill him. Pressure gets blamed for a lot of failed elk hunts as well. And sometimes pressure absolutely changes everything. Opening weekend can move elk. ATV traffic can shut down obvious drainages. Calling pressure can make bulls quieter. Road pressure can push elk into pockets a lot of hunters never consider. Camps, boot tracks, scent, and repeated disturbance, they all matter. But pressure is not always the enemy. Pressure can be information. It can tell you where hunters are entering. It tells you which basins are obvious. It can tell you which ridges are getting called from, and it can tell you which roads elk are avoiding, which trails they're crossing at night, and which pieces of security cover start becoming more valuable once the easy country is already touched. The mistake is treating pressure like a dead end and something to be frustrated and angry about instead of a clue. A weak hunting plan says there are too many people here, the hunt's ruined. A stronger, more disciplined, educated, experienced plan says, where would elk go to avoid this pressure? And how can I get there without becoming part of that same pressure? That shift matters a lot because pressured elk are not random. They still need food, water, bedding cover, wind advantage, escape routes, security. Those bulls still want those cows. Pressure doesn't necessarily eliminate opportunity. It just separates hunters who react emotionally and want to complain about pressure from the hunters who actually read the mountain. Now, the death of easy elk hunting sounds negative, but I don't see it that way. I actually think of all this in a way where it creates a bigger advantage for the right kind of elk hunter. Because when the easy version dies, the casual approach dies with it. The guy who expects elk to be where they were on a scouting video gets exposed. The guy who copies a tactic without understanding why it works gets exposed. The guy who doesn't prepare physically, doesn't shoot enough, isn't prepared for the final steps, he gets exposed. The guy who can only hike hard but never slows down enough to read the wind, the terrain, the pressure, and timing gets exposed. The guy who doesn't understand elk behavior gets exposed. But the hunter who adapts to all this gains ground. They get leverage. If you're willing to think deeper, move cleaner, scout smarter, and make better decisions, modern elk hunting still gives you plenty of opportunity. It just doesn't hand out as many opportunities easily. And that means you have to become more complete, more well-rounded, more optimal, like I've talked in previous podcasts. You need to understand how elk use security cover after pressure. You need to know when fresh sign is huntable and when it's already too late. You need to recognize when a drainage is actually dead and when elk have only shifted one layer deeper. You need to stop measuring the quality of your hunt by how many miles you hiked and start measuring it by how many good decisions you actually stacked. That's where the gap is growing. Elk hunting is not becoming impossible, it's becoming less forgiving. And less forgiving environments reward elk hunters who prepare, observe, adjust, and execute with discipline. The old easy game might be dying, but for the hunter willing to evolve, the real game is just beginning. Now, if easy elk hunting is dying, then hunters need something more reliable than hope. And that's where a system matters. For me, what I teach, that system starts with 5 words: locate, evaluate, position, execute, and adjust. First, we locate. That doesn't always mean laying eyes on elk. It just means finding fresh enough tracks, fresh rubs, recent poop, a hot wallow, a bugle, a strong smell, or a pattern of movement that tells you elk are close right now. Then we evaluate. Don't just get excited because you found sign. We've got to ask whether it's current, whether it's huntable, what time it was made, what wind allowed it, and whether pressure has already changed that pattern. Then we position. This is where a lot of hunts are won or lost. Get the wind right. Use the terrain correctly. Stay hidden. Think about where elk want to go, not where you wish they would go. Then we have to execute. When the opportunity finally comes, we've got to stop rushing. We've got to make the shot count. We've got to make the call count. Any sound we make or not make. Make the move and make the decision with control and maturity. And finally, we have to adjust. If the plan fails, don't fall apart. Read what changed and make the next best move. That's modern elk hunting. Not guessing, not copying old plans or somebody else's tactic randomly, not just hoping. A repeatable process that keeps you in the game. The death of easy elk hunting is not the end of elk hunting. It's the end of shortcuts. It's the end of the weak guy. It's the end of showing up unprepared, hunting obvious country, copying random tactics, ignoring pressure, and expecting elk to cooperate just because you bought a tag, worked hard, and really want it to happen. But that should not discourage you either. It should sharpen you, because elk hunting is still one of the greatest challenges in the world. Not just the West, the world. Bulls are still killable, opportunity still very much exists, but the modern elk hunter has to think better, move cleaner, prepare deeper, and adapt faster. Now, if you want to go deeper into elk movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the elk hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how elk actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of elk resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. Looking forward to seeing you in the comments. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.